Hello friends, welcome to Crime Insights Official, where we dive deep into the most heart-wrenching, controversial and jaw-dropping crime stories from around the world. If you are interested in understanding the layers of mystery, corruption and the pursuit of justice behind these incidents, then you have come to the right place. Our mission is to bring you the truth, unravel the darkest corners of these stories and honor the memory of victims who are often forgotten. Before we start today's episode, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel to stay updated with the latest crime stories that deserve attention. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring light to these cases that must never be forgotten. Today's story is one that has left me speechless, overwhelmed with emotion and truly shaken to my core. It's not just a crime, it's a story of a young doctor, a woman with dreams and a future that was brutally taken from her in the most horrifying way imaginable. This is the tragic tale of Dr. Moumita, a 31-year-old postgraduate trainee at Kolkata Medical College in Kolkata. Her life was dedicated to saving others, but in a crucial twist of fate, she couldn't save herself from the nightmare that awaited her. As we walk through this heart-wrenching story, I can't help but feel the weight of every detail, and I invite you to join me in remembering Moumita as more than just a victim, but as a person who deserves justice. It was August 8, 2024, a day which began like any other but ended in unspeakable tragedy. Dr. Moumita had just finishing a grueling 36-hour shift. You can imagine the exhaustion that must have overwhelmed her. A doctor's life is full of sacrifices, sleepless nights, missing family events, putting patients' lives ahead of their own well-being, and that's exactly the kind of person Moumita was. Dedicated, hardworking, and passionate about her profession. She had plans, dreams, and hopes for the future, but none of that would matter soon. After finishing her long shift, Moumita went to the seminar hall to rest. This was supposed to be a brief moment of relief, a quiet place where she could gather her energy for the next duty. Little did she know that this decision, so seemingly innocent, would be the beginning of her last moments. The next morning, August 9, 2024, the hospital was plunged into chaos. Colleagues found Dr. Moumita's lifeless body in the seminar hall. The sight was horrific. She was half naked, bruised, and bore the signs of brutal assault. It was a scene no one should ever have to witness, especially within the walls of a hospital, a place where life is preserved and saved. I can't help but imagine the shock and disbelief that must have rippled through the hospital. Her colleagues, people she worked with every day, were the ones to find her. What could they have felt? Grief, rage, fear, knowing that someone they worked with, someone they cared for, had met such a horrifying end right where they believed they were safe. At first, the hospital authorities tried to convince everyone that this was a case of suicide, but that didn't make sense to her family nor to anyone who knew Moumita. When her family saw her body, they knew in their hearts that this was not a suicide. They could see the signs of violence, the unmistakable evidence that something far more sinister had happened. The truth came out in the autopsy report, and it was worse than anyone could have imagined. Dr. Moumita had not taken her own life. She had been raped, sexually assaulted, and then strangled to death. The report described severe injuries all over her body. Her face, lips, legs, hands, and neck showed clear signs of a struggle. There was a deep wound on her ring finger, possibly from a violent attempt to defend herself. But the most chilling detail was the confirmation of sexual assault, a brutal attack that left her broken in every sense of the word. The autopsy also suggested that the possibility of gang rape, with evidence of around 150 milliliter of biological fluid found during the examination. Yet, despite this glaring evidence, the Kolkata police dismissed these claims, saying that it was impossible to distinguish whether the semen was from one or multiple individuals with the naked eye during an autopsy. Their dismissal was not only insensitive but also raised suspicions of a cover-up. How could they ignore the clear evidence? As news of Moumita's tragic murder spread, outrage followed. I remember seeing the images and videos of doctors, medical students, and healthcare workers pouring into the streets of Kolkata, holding candlelight vigils in her memory. The air was heavy with grief, and the city was united in a shared sense of loss. They demanded justice, not just for Moumita, but for every woman who walks into her workplace fearing for her safety. The Indian Medical Association, representing more than 3.5 lakh doctors across the country, called for a 24-hour nationwide strike. It was a powerful statement. Non-emergency services were suspended as doctors across India stood in solidarity with Moumita's family and colleagues. These protests were not just about Moumita's death, they were about the safety of every healthcare professional in India, especially women. I can't help but think about the vulnerability doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers face in their everyday lives. They are the people who dedicate themselves to healing others, and yet they have to live in fear of violence in their own workplaces. This protest was not just a plea for justice, it was a cry for change. As the investigation progressed, all eyes were on the police. People wanted answers and fast. The investigation led to the arrest of Sanjay Roy, a civic volunteer who worked with the Kolkata Police Disaster Management Force. He had a history of domestic abuse, and there was evidence that he had been frequenting the hospital for some time. The discovery of his Bluetooth headset at the crime scene seemed to confirm his involvement. But even with his arrest, there was a sense of unease. Was this really the person behind such a calculated and horrific crime? Was he acting alone, or were there others involved? The public, the doctors, and most importantly, Moumita's family were not convinced that the full story had come to light. The calls for a more thorough investigation grew louder, with many demanding that the CBI take over the case. There was a growing distrust in the local police, and rightfully so. People feared that the police were not telling the full truth and that crucial evidence might be swept under the rug. By August 13, 2024, the Kolkata High Court had heard enough. They were unsatisfied with the way the Kolkata police were handling the investigation and decided to transfer the case to the CBI. This was a huge moment. The court raised concerns about the possibility of evidence being tampered with or destroyed if the local police continued to handle the case. They wanted to ensure that the investigation was fair, impartial, and transparent. This decision was met with relief, not just the Moumita's family, but by the public at large. By the first time since this horrific event, there was hope that justice would be served. The court also ordered the Central Industrial Security Force and the Central Reserve Police Force to provide security at the hospital to prevent any further incidents or tampering with the crime scene. By August 18, 2024, the case had escalated to the Supreme Court of India. A three-judge bench led by Chief Justice took Shimoto cognizance of the case, recognizing the widespread public outrage and the need for immediate action. During the hearings, the court did not hold back in criticizing the state government, the Kolkata police, and the college administration for their mishandling of the case. They condemned the vandalism that had taken place on August 14 when around 7,000 people gathered at the crime scene, potentially destroying crucial evidence in the process. The court emphasized the need for proper security and investigation protocols to be followed strictly. The Supreme Court also took a broader stance, constituting a national task force to ensure the safety of doctors in their workplaces. This was a direct response to the protests by healthcare workers who were now calling for systematic change. The court requested that the protesting doctors return to work, but assured them that their voices would not be silenced. In a hearing on August 22, 2024, the Supreme Court was once again critical of how the case had been handled. They expressed deep concern over the time delay between the discovery of Moumita's body and the filing of the first information report. This delay raised serious questions about the integrity of the local police and their commitment to finding the truth. The court made it clear that swift actions was necessary to ensure justice. They asked the state government to refrain from taking any action against the protesters, especially the doctors and civilians who had taken to the streets demanding accountability. The court's involvement brought a sense of hope, but there was still a long way to go. As the investigation progressed, more disturbing information came to light. All recordings, video clips, and other pieces of evidence surfaced, showing that Dr. Moumita had been on a mission to expose the darkest secrets of the hospital administration. She had discovered uncovered unethical practices, corruption, and medical malpractice that had been going on behind the scenes. Moumita, brave as she was, had been determined to bring this information to the public eye, but this determination would ultimately lead to her demise. It was revealed that the principal of Arjika Medical College had been aware of her plans and had orchestrated her murder to silence her. He couldn't afford to have his dirty secrets exposed, and in a sickening act of betrayal, he arranged for Sanjay Roy to take the blame for the crime. Imagine the horror of knowing that someone Moumita had likely seen as a figure of authority had played a direct role in her death. My heart breaks as I think about how much she must have trusted the very people who conspired to end her life. It's a chilling reminder of how corruption can seep into even the most trusted institutions. As Sanjay Roy faced the death penalty, the weight of the truth finally broke him. He confessed that he had been paid to take the fall for the crime. He admitted that the principal had orchestrated the entire plot, from the rape and murder to the cover-up, to ensure that his secrets would remain hidden. I can't imagine the level of fear and desperation that must have led Sanjay Roy to agree to such a thing, but at the same time, it's impossible to excuse his role in the crime. He may not have been the mastermind, but he still played a part in one of the most heinous acts imaginable. With Sanjay Roy's confession, the case took a dramatic turn. The principal of Arjika Medical College was arrested and charged with orchestrating the murder of Dr. Moumita. His arrest sent shockwaves through the medical community. People had long suspected that something was amiss, but the idea that someone in such a position of power can be involved in such a crime was still difficult to comprehend. But as relieved as people were to see him behind bars, there were still many unanswered questions. Was this truly the end of the conspiracy, or were there others involved? Could it be that there were more people, perhaps even within the police or hospital administration, who had helped cover up the crime? Dr. Moumita's death sparked a movement. Doctors, healthcare workers, women, white advocates, and everyday citizens rallied together to demand systematic change. The protests that began in Kolkata spread across India, with people demanding better workplace protections for doctors, especially women, and stricter laws to prevent violence in healthcare settings. The Supreme Court's involvement gave people hope, but it also underscored just how much work was left to do. The court's creation of a national task force to address workplace safety for doctors was a step in the right direction, but this fight was far from over. As I sit here reflecting on Dr. Moumita's story, I feel a deep sense of sorrow, but also anger. This should never have happened. A young woman full of potential was taken from this world in the most violent and unjust way possible, and it was not just an isolated incident. It was a result of a systematic failures, corruption, and greed.